Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'm going to talk about the topic of spiritual crisis, and I'm also going to talk about that showing some cards from the Osho Zen Tarot. And I wanted to talk about this topic of spiritual crisis today because I've been doing a bit of thinking about this topic lately, and I have been making a few videos about my spiritual path and how it has changed. And I was realizing very recently that what I have experienced with my spiritual path changing so much has actually been a spiritual crisis at the time when all of the most intense change was taking place. So I wanted to talk about that because the topic of spiritual crisis is not discussed very often, and I wanted to talk about how that has been for me, how I have experienced that, and what the process is like, and how spiritual crisis can coincide with psychological change as well, because I am experiencing quite intense psychological change happening at the same time. And I suppose for some people, spiritual crisis and psychological change may not necessarily happen at the same time. For me, that is what is happening. For some people, that could be totally separate issues. So you could have spiritual crisis without major psychological change happening, and you could also have major psychological change without a spiritual crisis. But mine happen to be coinciding. So what I have been experiencing and what I am sort of coming out of now is a kind of a shamanic type of experience. So it has been life-changing, really, and I never use these terms in a casual way. It is a life-changing experience. It's a kind of experience when, if it does happen to you, you can't be the same afterwards. And I knew for a while that I was going through a process like this, but I didn't realise until recently exactly what this actually has been. And it has been a spiritual crisis, and the psychological change is still going on. And I also think there will be later stages of this and residue from this for several years onwards for me. In my case, I don't think this has happened and then that will be all there is to it, because for me there is integration to take place, and that has started, and there is a lot of psychological processing to do as well. So I'm going to talk about this showing the Osho Zen Tarot. This is the smaller version that was published in 2003, and I have the larger version, the original one, from 1994 as well. And I've chosen this deck to talk about this because the Osho Zen approach, which is Zen Buddhism, is actually the closest thing that I can find to show and present something in regards to my new spiritual approach. So this is the best way that I can explain this, and I just find this tarot really fits my approach to spirituality now. I've always regarded this tarot really well, but it was always a bit quirky for me. But now this tarot, it just clicks with me completely now. I can fully relate to this tarot deck now, and I didn't think I would necessarily connect with it so much, but now, because this represents my spiritual approach in the best way that I can explain it, this deck is really perfect for me to do that. So here is the book, and the book is quite good. I'm going to talk a little bit about Osho after I talk about the spiritual crisis. But this book is quite good, and it's got some really good spreads in here as well. So I really like the book. Now, just to talk a bit about the spiritual crisis, and I may as well show this card before I get started. Here is a picture of Osho. This is the master card in the deck, which is part of the major arcana. In some ways, it's an extra major arcana card. So I quite like this card. Osho always promoted the embodiment of the Buddha, to aim to attain that. So I like this card. Now the first card is Change, which is the Wheel of Fortune in the major arcana normally, which is the wheel of change. And this card looks a bit like a whirlwind in a way too. And this card really represents the turning of time, but in some ways it's unexpected change as well. But this card represents kind of change is really the single word to describe the process that I've been experiencing. Change is really the simplest word that you can use. The next card is called New Vision, and it's actually the Hanged Man card in the major arcana. So this is a great card. What would normally be the Hanged Man card. And I certainly have got a new vision. It's been a transition for me. But yes, I really do look at spirituality and life itself in quite a different way. So this card is representing that very closely for me. So I think this is a great card called New Vision, which would normally be the Hanged Man card. These are the backs of the cards, by the way. The next card is Transformation, which is normally the Death card. And this is very much what I have experienced. Transformation and the clearing of my former spirituality and my outlook on life. So this card completely represents what I have experienced as a kind of spiritual crisis. And it has been a spiritual crisis, not only because of the intense change, but I did experience this as a crisis, because if you watch any of my previous videos about this, where I have talked about the process, especially the video that I've called Spiritual Path Change and Challenge, particularly talks about this, where I particularly felt this as a kind of a shamanic experience, and felt that I was in a spiritual desert, and everything just felt like a huge void. And it was because of this transformation process that was occurring. So this card really does represent not only death, but the clearing away so that something new will replace it, like a kind of rebirth. But I was not aware that anything was going to replace all of my years of spirituality. So this card really represents this experience of spiritual crisis for me. And then the next card, which is called Beyond Illusion, which would normally be the Judgment card. So I really like this card and this version of the Judgment card, which for me represents rebirth. And this is quite how I feel. This is how I feel now. Regenerated, spiritual regeneration. So at the same time that I'm experiencing spiritual regeneration, there is psychological regeneration taking place as well, so that it will affect not only my spiritual approach but my psychological outlook as well, and it is doing that. It's a bit hard to explain this completely because it's almost like a type of initiation, but I'm using these cards to try to explain and describe what the spiritual crisis and process is like, and what the psychological response to that is. And I'm also in a state of allowing and surrendering to the process as well. And I think for me that has been the best response, and I am feeling far more spiritually fulfilled, and psychologically I think this will be more beneficial for me as well. I have found a lot of fulfillment in spirituality over many years, but I think this spiritual approach fits me and my approach to life far more closely than how I was experiencing spirituality before. Spirituality before this mainly involved study and inner work, and now the higher self for me is much more about contemplation and reflection. So it is more like a Zen Buddhist type of approach. And the last card is the Fool card, which is very much where I am now, embarking on the return journey of the Fool, a whole new experience and a whole new spiritual journey. So this card really represents that now, after experiencing the spiritual crisis, feeling more fulfilled and inspired about my new spirituality and my new approach to spirituality and life. So I hope those cards helped to describe the spiritual crisis and spiritual process that I've been experiencing. And now I just want to talk a little bit about a couple of Osho books that people might be interested in. This is Tarot in the Spirit of Zen, and it's a paperback book, and it is a book that you could get as an extra supplement book to the Osho Zen Tarot. It was published in 2003. I'm not sure if it's still available. And I think it is a bit like the book that comes with the deck now, but this is a better size. I don't think it's exactly the same. I think it only talks about the cards, and I don't think there are spreads in this book. I think it is slightly different. It mainly talks about the cards. There's about 3 or 4, there's some different tables in here, and even a table of correspondences in here. So it's worth getting if you can. You might need to get this second hand or on Amazon. So Tarot in the Spirit of Zen, and of course it's based on the writing and ideas of Osho. I'll put the details below the video. And one other book by Osho, which is From Medication to Meditation by Osho. This is a great book, one of the many great books that Osho wrote. And again, it may be available secondhand. It could still be in print, but I'm not sure. This is a great book about health and alternative health and meditation and its beneficial effect on the body. And it's written in question and answer format, which is quite good. So this is based on questions that were put to Osho and his replies to these different questions about physical health and mental health and meditation. And it's a really great book. It's a very practical book too, but Osho's style is quite funny as well. There's always some funny stories or little jokes that he used to make, and all from a Zen Buddhist perspective, but all of his books are really worth getting. Now just a bit about Osho before I finish here. Osho was known as Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. I don't know if many of you watching would be old enough to remember the group of people who wore orange clothes and were known as the Orange People. Well, they were led by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. who was actually a professor of philosophy. Then he changed his name to Osho, which is a Japanese word for friend. And Osho died in 1990, and there was a very large ashram that was set up in America. And he was not popular with the authorities because his approach was always to encourage people to think independently and out of the box, and that was frowned upon by the authorities. He really was a maverick and ahead of his time. And people like Deepak Chopra and even the Dalai Lama were fans of his teachings. So that will give you some idea of the value of his spiritual teachings, and probably helps to confirm in some ways why he was seen as such a threat to society. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Osho so people have some idea of who Osho was. And for people interested in Zen Buddhism and spirituality in general, the Osho books are very worthwhile getting and reading, because they will encourage you to read between the lines and to look at things in a different way and life in general. So I'll put the details below the video, and I hope that this talk about my spiritual crisis and how the Osho Zen Tarot has really helped me to make sense of all that. And the Osho Zen Tarot is really useful for me to describe my approach to spirituality and my approach to life from a spiritual viewpoint. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.